Okay, I think we're live.
Okay.
Hi everyone. I'm like imagining everyone's coming in, they're sitting down.
We'll never
Um, exactly. So welcome to this exciting event about blueberries by Ellena Savage. My name is Christina Neuwirth. I'm one of the booksellers here at Lighthouse. And before I introduce Ellena, I'll just kind of run us through what's about to happen in the next hour. So after I introduce Ellena, we're going to have a little chat, and then Elena's going to give us a little reading from Blueberries to give you a flavor of the book. We'll have a little bit more of a chat, and then towards the end of the hour, kind of around about the last 20 minutes, we'll have time for some questions. So do put them in the chat below. And then at 7:30, we'll close. So that's what's going to happen. Welcome to Lighthouse Bookshop, Ellena.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here. I wish it was in real life, but Zoom is second best.
Yeah. We're very excited to have you, and we're very excited also to welcome you to the shop when you make it to Edinburgh. It would be so nice to just like show you all the bits, and all the booksellers can show you all their favorite parts of the shop. So to introduce our speaker, this is Ellena Savage, who is an Australian author and academic. She's the author of the chapbook Yellow City, which was published in 2019, and numerous essays, stories, and poems published in literary journals internationally. Ellena is the recipient of several grants and fellowships, including most recently the Martin Bequest Travelling Scholarship 2019 to 2021. She lives in Athens, Greece, with her husband, Dominic Amarena. And we're here to talk about Ellena's collection, Blueberries, which is very beautiful, and which you're about to see, two different versions. So, which is published. I love both, actually. I love like the pink color scheme, but I love the
Too. And this is quite moody.
Mhm.
Yeah, a bit abstract.
I like how in the Australian one the text kind of vanishes, or like how it's like squeezed up.
Yeah, sort of like sort of holes or vessels inside the
Mhm.
image.
Yeah. So I guess my first question for you is really how would you describe blueberries to like someone who's completely new to your work?
Yeah, I would describe it as a collection of essays, but it's probably not a collection of essays that you uh, maybe would expect. The way that I've approached essays is quite loosely. I guess my Australian edition has the word memoir on the front, so that's obviously a kind of decision to kind of present the book more as a memoir than essays. And then on the UK cover, it has essays on the cover, so it's somewhere between memoir and essays. They're moving, it's about kind of capitalism mainly, and being a woman in capitalism, being an artist in capitalism. It's about my life, but not just my life. It's about the kind of like being alive at this particular point, at the particular nexus that I occupy as a kind of white woman in Australia, kind of colonial country, queer person, academic with aspirations that I could never possibly achieve within capitalism because they're so out of whack with the world that I live in. So that is how I would try to sell it to someone, and then my agent would say, "Just let me take over. That doesn't make any sense." um,
Um, and so how did it kind of come about? Did you write it over quite a long period of time, or did you kind of sit
yeah,
down to say, I'm writing a memoir?
no, I definitely was. I don't know the exact process because I just had been kind of working for so long on material that I thought was going to be my first book. And I found this kind of, I guess, because it's such a personal book, and it's such a political book as well, it kind of like, I found the form or the forms for it at a particular time in my life when I was kind of living my life with a bit more autonomy than I had been previously. I was making strides to try to make the kind of life that I wanted to have, but didn't have any kind of understanding of how I could get it. And I was filled with anger. I was so angry. And one thing that really, I really love angry literature. And it's actually how I kind of, I think you were going to ask me whether I consider this book a feminist book or not. And I absolutely do. And one of the reasons that I came to like feminist theory was actually like through finding books as a teenager in the library, kind of second wave books. And there was something, I was reading other kinds of, philosophy, but what really drew me in with feminist theory, it was of course the ideas, which I could relate to. They had something to do with my life, but it was the style of writing. Like if you read Andrea Dworkin, like she's angry and she's so like, there's so much energy in the writing and it's so personal. Or Bell Hooks is another one who's just like, I read her and I was like, you can do philosophy, but also be a thinking, feeling person, like how you love and how your sadness is like a part of politics. These things aren't separate from each other. And so I kind of found myself at a stage in my life where I was like filled with anger. I was really confused about my anger. And I wanted to kind of bring some of my energy into my work. And I feel like I finally had gotten to a place with my writing where I could actually craft anger. So I wasn't just like sitting there like, like vomiting on the page. I was kind of using kind of craft to kind of measure out my rage. Yeah. So the skills and the life circumstance aligned in a particular moment. And, it was actually a few years ago when I was writing this, and my life has changed really significantly since I was writing it. I don't live in Australia anymore, for example. I have a lot more financial security than I had then. I have a lot more freedom in my life than I had then. And so I kind of read some of these now, and I'm like, I couldn't write them now, even though I probably have more skill and more knowledge than I do now. I don't have the same access to emotional intensity that I had then. So I'm kind of glad that this exists as a kind of document of a very important part of my life that I think is also a part of life for many, many women and queer people.
Yeah. There are two things that I do want to hear you read soon, but there are two things that just kind of came to me while you were speaking then. One is that anger really stood out to me as like so generative in the collection. I think there's one section that really stuck with me where in the essay you talk about women being expected to like forgive everyone all the time for like when they've been wronged or harmed, especially men. And I think the paragraph goes something like, we've done enough forgiving, like we've forgiven enough, like I don't have to forgive.
Yeah. And that's
so,
kind of Christian throwback as well. It's like it's not actually a kind of intrinsic part of human culture to be able to forgive. And I just kind of don't believe that like in that Christian tradition that people can say they can forgive, but they can't necessarily get past something. And I think that like when there's a disjuncture between like what you say, what is socially appropriate to say, and what's really going on, there's so much tension there. And I'm really excited when people break that tension and they go, no, I won't forgive you. I don't want to. Like I don't have to pretend that this was okay.
Yeah.
And I think that was the kind of energy that I was like, no, I don't want to get over stuff. There's a sexual assault in one of the essays. It's about a kind of an assault that I experienced when I was 18, and I was going back to find the court documents. That's the first chapter of the book. And I kind of had this like this really ambivalent experience of like I've been kind of harmed by this thing, and the effects of that don't just fizzle out and go away. And yet, on the other hand, I'm a powerful person. I'm completely fine in the sense that like everything that has happened to me is, made me a resilient person, or a person that I am, whether I'm not or not I'm resilient all the time. And so you have this thing where you're like, and this is one of the tensions of kind of feminist thought and the feminist project in general. It's like there's so much cruelty and unfairness against women and queer people, and in order to kind of like ameliorate that or have it recognized, you have to find a way to articulate it. But then when you're articulating it, you're like, but this isn't the whole picture. I'm not just a sad person that like experiences victimhood all the time. I'm also like I'm also a person who can oppress others. I'm also a person who can laugh at herself. I'm also a person who can find the funny part of anything. So that's, I can't remember your question.
I think I just wanted to reiterate that like the anger definitely came through as like really generative, and that also reading the like actually like I'm not going to forgive, like it is I found really just really powerful in it. But also the humor throughout the collection, there were definitely bits that I like laughed out loud at and like forced my partner to listen to me read out to him. So which I think is also it has that fullness of experience.
Thank you, that means a lot to hear back. Because it was important to me to kind of I think there's a moment in in the essay I was just mentioning where I'm 29, I'm going back to this place to look for the records of this assault, and I also like looked up the emails that I wrote my brother at the time, and one of them was like because he had been sent a report from the police or something, because I must have given them my parents' home address, and my brother got it, and he like emailed me and is like, what the hell's going on, are you okay? There's like some assault has happened. And I'm like, yes, well, an assault did happen. I'm probably going to send the men to jail. Other than that, I'm fine and dandy. I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. This is a completely bizarre experience. And of course, at that time, I'm like in this completely like ambivalence for an 18-year-old, or me as an 18-year-old. I'm sure a lot of 18-year-olds are a lot more sophisticated than I was then. But ambivalence is like, it's like you inhabit two distinct states, one of which is complete terror, trauma, fear. And one is like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And I feel like as I've gotten older, those two states have overlapped and come to kind of inhabit and depend on one another in a way that is much more balanced, and I can live with, and I can say this terrible thing happened and I'm fine, but also this is sad, but also I was a funny little 18-year-old trying to compartmentalize. But I kind of wrote that into the essay in a way that I wanted like the reader to laugh, and then feel very uncomfortable about their laughter.
I love that the record seeking and the record keeping actually through the book. The kind of, I think there's one of the later essays in the collection talks about going back and like opening like an old email inbox that you've not looked at for a long time and kind of seeing like like almost like the record of your existence. But the writing back to yourself, I also really hadn't like seen in that way, kind of inhabiting both the like critical eye and the like experiencing like narrative eye, and having both, and like them not destroying each other.
I have not. I didn't invent the form. I did take it from, I was influenced by a book called Childhood by Nathalie Sarraute, which is a very fascinating memoir for anyone who's interested in experimental life writing.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see if we can like put a link or like put a note after. I would love it if you could read for us from one of the pieces in the collection.
Yes, this one's called Unwed Teen Mum Mary, and just as a content warning, it's about an abortion. So if that's something that's upsetting for you, then just don't listen to it. I'm trying to get work taste testing new snacks for 7-Eleven. They pay $40 per taste test in the form of a prepaid Visa gift card, which will be handy for buying groceries or topping up my MyKey. To apply to be a person to whom 7-Eleven offers such precious opportunities, I must fill out a questionnaire in such a way as to convince their marketing people that I am a frenetic consumer of overpriced snacks. In the questionnaire, I select the statement, "I work to live," which is true, but only in the sense that to pay for the debt of living, a person is required to work. This is not a choice so much as it is a banality. How often do you make impulse purchases at 7-Eleven stores? The questionnaire asks. Frequently, I lie. In fact, I hate 7-Eleven and everything in it. In fact, I almost never impulse buy convenience store products. Yesterday, I applied for work running platters of canapes at the catering company I worked for when I was 20. Yesterday, I signed up to a mailing list for market research opportunities. Yesterday, I asked my friends with kids to pass my number on to any wealthy parents they know who are looking for help with childcare or cleaning. Yesterday, I applied for work counting votes in the upcoming state election. An editor emailed the other day asking if I would contribute to her anthology on abortion, something with the word choice in the title, which would raise funds for a national non-profit abortion provider. She said I'd get paid for my contribution. I thought about the kind of anthology this would be, and how the kind of anthology this would probably be the kind of anthology that I would pay little attention to, though I was flattered to be asked to contribute to it, because I'm basically a snob, and because I don't think that politicians intent on restricting or criminalizing reproductive rights need to read a nuanced anthology on abortion written by mostly white, mostly middle-class women like me so much as they need to be taken out one at a time. A joke, that's a joke. And then I thought about the number of 7-Eleven taste tests I'd have to do for the same amount of money, how many hours of running platters of canapes to hotel corporation stakeholders on Cup Weekend. I chose the $200. When I think about the word choice, I think about how it represents a fantasy, an important fantasy and one perhaps worth protecting, but an unreal circumstance really. Circumstance, writes Anne Boyer, are the stage on which agency performs. Agency as opposed to autonomy, which requires some degree of control over circumstances. For example, I didn't choose to be alive, and I didn't choose to be settled in an overpriced city, and I didn't choose at age 30 to be lying about my love of Slurpees to pay for groceries from one of the duopoly of the price-fixing supermarkets, groceries I cook up at my house, that also serves as my primary workplace where I work at my several not really real jobs. And I didn't choose to carry around a small robot that exposes me to radiation and listens to all of my words and bodily excretions. Well, perhaps I did choose that purchase, naive consumer me, but without it, my several not really real jobs would fast become unviable. Siri, do I have a choice? I really couldn't say, Ellena. I didn't choose my parents and they didn't choose me. They didn't choose my particular genetic code, nor my penchant for feeling hard done by, nor my rather negative attitude towards the hegemony of biological family making. I didn't choose to be a person who finds intolerable things that other people, most people, normal people, tolerate seemingly with pleasure and with ease. Things like handing over personal data to corporations in exchange for small product bonuses. Things like wedding registries. Things like the legal enforcement of helmet wearing. I didn't choose to get pregnant when I did, though I was complicit in that choice, in that I chose to have sex that night, I suppose, in the mangled way that sometimes happens with a person you have not planned to have sex with, and probably won't again. And I chose to have it in such a way that made possible slippage of biological material from one place to another. Though in all honesty, I didn't think that person I was with would be so careless as to endanger me in that way. And I chose to imbibe the several drinks that led me to this somewhat unglamorous affair. I did not choose the patriarchal condition of normative heterosexual hookups, whereby the primary form of eroticism is the careless penile penetration of women and women-shaped people in pursuit of male orgasm, regardless of disease or pregnancy. But I did choose to exercise in my warped way my puny young girl's agency to objectify guys with the aim of reversing the ways in which I had been fucked and fucked over by them. I didn't choose to be too broke to pay for the out-of-pocket for the abortion anesthetic, which at the Royal Women's was $140, and I didn't choose the character of the girl I was seeing at the time, though the character of the girl I was seeing at the time was what had endeared her to me. And while I did not choose for her to pay for the anesthetic, she did it anyway, because that was her character, And while I was getting my guts pried open, the girl napped on her rolled up leather jacket like a sweet punk rock baby in the in the barren chamber of the hospital. And for this she is due my eternal gratitude. I didn't choose to have zero emotional after effects from that abortion, though I felt I couldn't mention this or too often or too loudly, in case it seemed in some way to trivialize the emotional after effects others experienced after theirs. More trivializing, I think, is the dominant cultural narrative I choose now not to abide by, the narrative of the inevitable future shame and regret post abortion, as though a feeling of regret is worse than a lifetime of poverty, or being eternally tethered to a man you hate, or being dependent for years on a biological family you wish to be separate from, or simply being forced to do something you instinctively don't want to do. I regret a lot, believe me. I regret my poor food choices and my poor work choices, and I regret being born with the biological equipment that bears the burdens of poor sexual choice making under the influence of alcohol at age 20. But in no chamber of my soul is there an inkling of regret about ending a pregnancy I didn't want. And if I hadn't had the choice to end it at the Royal Women's, I'd have done it anyway. I'd have rolled down a flight of stairs. I'd have seen a dodgy doctor. I'd have drunk poison. I'd have done it all, and I might have died trying. Because this is what agency is. It is doing what you can do with the circumstances you are dealt. It is choosing to do what you need to do, even and especially when your parents or your superego or the law disapproves. In my opinion, sex is not a sacred jewel, and poor erotic decisions are not something women need protection from, and motherhood is not holy. In my view, any effort to pair femininity with maternity or biological destiny, with virgin births, with earthy crystal lovemaking, is an effort to relegate the female form to a position of inferiority, to a state of constant need and gratitude and dependence. It's all predicated on a founding myth of Christian society, the ideal of sexless maternity. But Julia Kristeva writes that the Virgin of the Virgin Mary was in fact a mistranslation of an ancient Semitic word for unmarried young woman. Conflating the virgin with unmarried young woman, she says, erases the young mother's extra patriarchal jouissance, evidence of her bodily joy and her sensual desires, and subsumes it under the male controlled virgin. The mistranslation is said to strip pre Christian societies of their matrilineal inheritance rights, and it strips Mary of her agency too, her scampish, light filled, unwed spirit, and replaces it with the sign of the Father. At 20, I did not want to be someone's mother. At 30, I have been all kinds of mother. I have paid the rent for rock dogs. I have made more meals than have been made for me. I have given more pleasure than has been given me. I am practically a saint. But no one tells me that, not enough anyway, though I am trying again to choose not to do that, not to be a mother. Instead, I'm trying to see that my tender red organs and the few dollars I earn and the words that I say and write are truly mine, and that I'm therefore responsible for what I do with them. Sheila Heti writes that the hardest thing for a woman to do is to choose to not become a mother. While the hardest thing is not always the best thing, I am curious about a life where choice is more rigorously available to me, and perhaps the first choice to make is the choice to take my agency, take it, make it mine. What do you love most about 7-Eleven stores? The questionnaire asks me. The convenience, I reply, and the charming service I always receive. Smiley face.
Thank you. We're getting some clapping in the chat also through. Thank you so much.
Clapping.
Yeah, that was great. It was great to hear that out loud.
I haven't read it out loud for a while, so my voice is kind of. I won't apologize.
No, it's great. It was great. And it's like a perfect example of something I did find so striking about the whole collection, which is how close in your writing you marry that personal experience and like kind of deeply personal experience with like a wider socioeconomic critique. And I just wondered how you arrived at that voice and why you feel that it's like important for you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of this one of the the big arguments of 20th century feminism is kind of that you connect the political and the personal, and I think there have been a lot of critiques all throughout the kind of past maybe 40 years, that doing that is often critiqued as a way of neoliberalizing selfhood and atomizing selfhood rather than politicizing personhood. And I reject that critique, mostly because I've definitely seen examples of feminist or women's writing that does kind of like, it completely detaches personal from politics, and that's fine because I like reading personal stuff that's not political. But I'm interested in making sure that that nexus is like always, it's always there, and that's what you're exploring. You're not exploring just personal. You're not exploring just kind of abstract political theory. Although both of those things can be really interesting, it's not, to me, that's not feminism. So there's always a kind of, and I think I'm not a socialist anymore, but I was as a teenager, and I think I read too much Marx as a teenager, and I'm just kind of like, there's no way that you can escape a kind of a good socialist brainwashing, where you're always thinking like, at the end of the day, what's creating all of the injustice in the world is probably something to do with, you know, private property. And so you can never kind of live, when you're thinking about lived experience, you're not talking about something that is very far removed ever from economic distributions. And so one of the things that I noticed about that essay as well, I'm like, oh, like I still hustle for work, but I haven't hustled for shitty like retail work for like 5 years. 4 or 5 years, and like in those 4 or 5 years I've become a much more kind of like boring bourgeois person, even though I'm still incredibly broke, and I still have to like beg people to get teaching work and this and that, but it is a different kind of work. And so I'm like looking at that person and I'm just like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to like get $40 to do a 7-Eleven taste test. That was really horrible. And that does produce a kind of like that, you know, that experience produces the framework for this kind of writing. And so now I don't think I could write like that, because I'd be like, what, I mean, am I complaining about my like I don't know, my sofa that I own? Like I don't have that much to complain about anymore, except that I have to kind of case it in more abstract political theory now, because I'm not living at the bottom of the kind of sludge pile. I'm like closer to like getting towards the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also found it so interesting how in that essay, because if I'm not mistaken, that is the essay that then ended up in that collection in
yes.
So I found that so interesting how it like
that was the essay I wrote for the anthology.
So I just thought that was brilliant, and also so like that tension, because I flipped to the front and I was like, hang on a second. And I think to also make it clear that like writing is art, but it's also work. And I feel like that's also so through the collection, is like the money that you would get for writing the very essay that the person is reading.
Yeah, and money is such an important thing. I think that's one thing that is missing from a lot of nonfiction, is like, I really do want to know, and maybe it's just because I'm like a snoop, like I just want to know people's private business. But to some extent, I guess I have a, you know, I don't come from an affluent background, and so I kind of didn't know how rude it was necessarily to ask people how much money they earned until way too old, you know, until way too late. But especially when it comes to writing, which I had musicians in my family. I could see how they earn money and how, you know, they don't earn much, but I knew how they earn money. With writing, like I had no exposure to the world of publishing until I was an adult. And so I was always kind of like asking people, and it was quite common for people in our generation to be doing that, like how much does this pay, how much does that pay, whatever. But also like, but if you're only like, I know how much all of these publications pay, and if this person is writing just for these publications, either they're in a shitload of debt or they've got some like other way of earning money, and I need to find out what that other way of earning money is, because I need to get some, because the publications aren't paying. And so money is always at the heart of like how do you pay to make work, and sometimes it's by pissing off an editor in an anthology.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she's a really great editor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's so. There was a writer in Edinburgh who for years would just like publish her accounts, or like
Wow, that's
be
radical.
like just like would basically just go like, here's what I made last year and this is like how I made it.
Oh my
um
God.
and I
Who's this?
don't know if it so I don't know if it's still online.
Right.
So it was Claire Askew, who she's a poet and she's a crime writer as well, and she used to, I think, on her blog for years kind of talk about exactly that and be like,
Right.
I am like a full-time writer, and
How
here's all the schools residencies I do, and here's
yeah,
all the like event work that I do, and here's all the other stuff, and like
yeah,
was quite open about um also getting her first advance for her crime novel and just what a difference that made suddenly to have like,
a chunk, just
yeah,
to
yeah.
pass. Yeah,
So, but it's such um yeah, I think as a bookseller and as a writer, it's kind of hard to escape that it's like there is like there's money also in the thing. There's also stories and like thoughts and adventures in a book, but there's also it's also like
it's
a thing
material.
you can buy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's material, and yeah, it kind of boggles my mind when I think about the kind of just the kind of network of transactions that occurs in an economy for a book like this to like just even get to a bookshop. You know, there's so much labor involved. It's not just the labor of the writer, but at every at every point, someone's earning good money, someone's earning shit money, someone's doing an internship, and it's so, unless you really like you're writing a feature and you ask everyone on that supply chain, it's totally mysterious, and that's obviously, you know, it's mysterious by design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Before we turn to questions, which I think are coming in, um, I did want to ask you also about the essay form and kind of how flexible you feel it is, and whether there's anything that you wanted to do with blueberries that you didn't feel would fit in an essay. Um, and because I think a lot of the review coverage has kind of focused on how the collection subverts the form, or how kind of it spans different genres. And you've said in the introduction that it's kind of a memoir and it's kind of essays and it's kind of both. So yeah, I just love to hear you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
sure. I think that my attraction to the essay as a genre is that it's not a super highbrow form. It doesn't sort of unfold majestically through time from a kind of a set origin. It doesn't have a sustained critical tradition. It doesn't have prizes attached to it, or not many, not historically. Whereas if you're writing something like a novel, you have a really like, you studied the novel. If you studied literature, you studied the novel. You know, you have these like really historical accounts and narratives about what a novel is. And essays, it's like you kind of know what an essay is because you read magazines and you read newspapers, and it's like the column is an essay, tell-all kind of confessional in a magazine is an essay, a essay is an essay, a politics feature is an essay, and you're like, there's no real kind of there's no rule about like what really is an essay and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And in the absence of that kind of critical tradition, you have just like freedom. You have no one to say this is not an essay. I think probably the only thing that you have to uphold is that um, you're writing nonfiction, and so you're kind of, you have the burden of truth. You're writing under the burden of truth, and you have an ethical obligation to represent as accurately as you can the information. But beyond that, like anything is essayistic, or it's maybe not anything, but it's extremely flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like it was kind of obviously you can probably see a lot of the influences in my work from different, you know, like second wave feminist kind of radical writing, lyric, you know, like kind of Anne Carson, you know, poetic writing, and Boyer, economic theory, and then like blogs from, you know, when I was a teenager reading the internet. So yeah, I found it just like it was the form for this particular book, what I wanted to say in this book, because I felt really free with it. I felt like I could move between high and low, abstract, concrete, funny, serious,
Mhm.
sad. Yeah. So I felt like it was a really good one. And now I'm kind of not really writing essays anymore. I've kind of moved on to the next thing, which for me is fiction, because I'm writing. I think one of the things that I found confounding about the essay after I finished the book, and I was trying to write some essays for like publication to help publicize the book, and I was like, I no longer feel like I can authoritatively claim anything. I don't
Mhm.
have an argument anymore. I've like argued too many things, and now I'm so unsure of myself, and or I kind of disagree with myself frequently. And so I writing a novel next. I've got 3 voices in this novel that I'm writing, and they're all kind of parts of me that disagree with myself. And so I'm able to inhabit these different things without having to choose one, which is
Mhm.
really liberating.
Yeah. Mhm. That, yeah, I can really see that. And I can also see that like there are various voices like coming through this collection here, in that way where there sometimes is that kind of disagreement or going, the other voice coming in and saying like, did I think this happened on a different day, or like I don't
Totally.
know, like correcting things, but having both voices on the page.
Each other, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. It reminded me a lot of I swore that I would look this up before the event, and then I didn't, so I don't have a reference. But
So I have a green cover.
um, I think a friend at some point told me about a poet who I think was Irish, that she kept like rewriting her work and kept like editing her work, and so would like write like a collection of poems, and then like for 20 years would just like edit and just like never finish. And it seemed that in this collection there was um, there was a point at which with each essay you finished
Yeah.
because like there did seem to be a little bit of that like self-editing or self like arguing with oneself, but there wasn't. That's kind of what I meant earlier when I said like it doesn't destroy each other, like it doesn't then end up with no essay at all. it's
Right.
it's like I don't know, I've heard the book described as fearless, and part of me reading this felt like that was very fearless, to let that tension stand and kind of go, I'm kind of editing my own reflections, or editing like how I understand things. Um, but I will let it like stand with that tension. I don't have to like resolve it by tying a neat bow or just like scrapping
Right.
it.
I actually like in retrospect, because I think I some of the arguments that I make, or some of the kind of interjections that I make, I probably wouldn't do them now, even though you do get in trouble. Like some readers really don't like it when you say something that might be very honest, but you also know that it's like outrageous. Like, I mean, even in that essay that I just wrote, like if I'm admitting that I wouldn't read this anthology. And I think it's important, it's kind of ethically important to not hedge and pretend that you're like a virtuous person or a really good person who doesn't ever have a like, selfish thought or like dismissive thought. Um, and I found myself hedging a little bit. And I think it's, it's good to not hedge. It's good to just kind of say the thing and just accept the consequences, because there are consequences. And it's good to accept the consequences. And I think that if you pretend to be a kind of neutral person with no positions on anything, and that you're always somewhere in the middle, that's a very dangerous place to be in, I think, because
Mm.
what do you stand for? Like, what I feel like it's important in writing, at least, to make claims and to expect there to be pushback.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So we're open for questions. I'm going to read the first question. Oh my God, there's so many questions. This is so exciting. So
Oh,
so I will start with a question from Suze. Was there any ground that you didn't feel you could cover when you wrote the book or selected the essays that went in it? And would you have made the same decision now?
anything I wouldn't cover. Yeah, I mean, there's so much I don't explore. Or I sort of have limits with myself. So it seems like it might seem for a reader who doesn't know me that I'm like revealing everything, every disgusting, horrible thought I've ever had and every tragic situation I've ever ended up in. But that's not actually the case. I'm much worse in real life. No. It's that like I reach a certain point and I go, okay, like this is for me or this is for my. I don't actually talk a lot about friends, for example. I'll mention like someone said this, but I never really examine a friendship really closely. I don't even say that much about my partner, except that he's a hunk of spunk. I don't write that much about my family, though they're in there. I don't go into my relationships with my family members in as much detail as I might if I were writing a different book or I wanted to say something about that. So I think maybe my personal relationships are kind of not for um, not being interrogated very particularly, except for the child parent relationship at that kind of like early adolescence period when I'm 18 and I'm like, I want to go and do whatever I want. And my parents are breaking my balls.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so definitely personal relationships probably. And I find that really scary because it's so much can go wrong when you write about the people who care about you.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if there's an ethical way to do that. And if there is, I don't know. Yeah, there might be, but I don't know what that would look like.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt a real in the travels with men essay. I think there was one part where one part of the voice reflects on a conversation that they had with someone who was in the original draft of the essay, or if I understood correctly. And then in the essay, reading it, that person doesn't actually seem to be there. So there seems to be like a little bit of
Yeah.
a reflection of like,
Yeah.
what does it mean to write autobiography or autobiographical stuff that other people also are like implicated in or like are a part of.
Mm.
Um, a question from Sean. Do you think that material comfort inevitably makes you less radical or bold as a writer? Do you ever worry about selling out the more raw, angry version of you as a writer?
No, I mean, okay, I think that like theoretically, no, I don't think that material comfort inevitably makes you less radical or bold as a writer. I think that that is, but I think that the way that I came to my politicization as a writer was so kind of it was in the swamp of personal experience. I didn't have a kind of um, critical perspective or anything like that. It was from the swamp of personal experience, and I think that now that I'm not in that swamp of misery really, and immiseration and poverty, I think that I want to retain that kind of radicalism and that energy and that anger, but it has to be from a different kind of perspective. And so this is, I guess, one of the the problems or the problems that I imagine with the concept of solidarity in the kind of political discourse that I think we're becoming more comfortable with now is that without personal experience, there's no politics, and I don't agree with that at all. I think that you have to be able to extend your imagination into other people's experiences so that you can have solidarity with them. And that means making space for them. And that means listening to them and supporting them. And it also means being angry for them because you're one step wrong in your life and you're that person, right? It's not anyone's it's not through your good deeds that you get out of that swamp. it's purely, luck, and, well, it's not even luck, it's class, really. So no, yeah, I think basically, no, I don't want to lose that. No, I don't think that I have to become a safe little bougie writer now. But I have to work on finding my way back to that material without having to suffer for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a challenge for me, I think.
Yeah. There's a question from Jude. I thought the book, which I loved, was wildly different in tone and topic from the way the description sold it. Was the pitch deliberately different, or was that just a marketing choice?
I have no idea what went on in the publishers' meetings. I agree that, like, I mean, I can see, on the Australian cover it says, "What kind of body makes a memoir," which is a quote from the book. But it is definitely kind of, it's gesturing towards memoir, right? And I think that even the kind of color, and I love both covers, but they're definitely kind of making, a sales claim about what's in the book. And I think that maybe this book looks like, it might not have any jokes. It might be not that interested in capitalism. It might be more focused on a kind of strictly personal kind of excavation or narrative. And yeah, I mean, I do think that that's something that goes on with women writers, even though I love both of my publishers, and I think that the market is pretty publishers have to make a claim, right? They have to just kind of put their foot down and go, like, where are we positioning this book? And I think that probably the way that they were marketed got this book into people's hands that wouldn't necessarily reach for and then pay $30 Australian for a book saying this is about class capitalism and an annoying woman who who wants you to laugh and cry. So yeah, I mean, it's complicated, and I don't know how I feel about it. And I just tend to trust that my publishers know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really interesting, I think, what makes it onto the cover, but I'm really glad that Jude picked it up and loved it. That's really good.
Yes.
And you can tell all your pals like your version of the marketing pitch.
And I think that some people did, like, I mean, there are certain essays that are about, that are more kind of like memoir-y, like straight memoir than others. And I think that, like, different readers had different takes from the book as well, and what they thought it was about. So yeah, they weren't wrong.
Yeah, definitely. You bring yourself to it, and then you'll pick out like what you feel it is. Is a question from Elle. Love hearing an Aussie voice in print, but it's so rare to get Australian writers in the UK. Why do you think so few books make the leap over here? And do you think you have a different audience in the UK?
I wish I could ask you that question, Elle, because being an Australian writer is such it's a strange thing to be in the broader Anglosphere, because of course in Australia you can have a really wide readership, and you can be quite, even commercially successful and prize winning, and then not get published in the UK or the States, and no one will have ever read your book. It's just not in print. So I wish that wasn't the case, and I do think that there is something to be said about, like, more kind of culturally dominant Anglo countries like the UK and the United States being kind of less interested in what's happening outside those kind of major centres. But I couldn't speak on behalf of a British reader. I really couldn't. But I would be really curious to hear. And I don't really know who my readers are in the UK, because I haven't spent any time there, because my book came out. I was going to make the trip. I was going to do some readings. I was going to come and do an event at, Lighthouse 2 years ago. And my book came out like the week of the first lockdown. So I really, like, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really has been flying off the shelf, so much so that like I keep wanting to tell people to buy it because we're doing this event, but we keep running out. Like we had this whole, I don't know if you saw the picture on Instagram, but we had this whole like display shelf that had like maybe 8 of them on there. And the next time I was in the shop, they were just all gone. So
Thank you so much.
just
Wow.
so exciting. There's a question from Kyle. This was such a great conversation. I'm a writer who wants to write politically, but I do worry about getting it wrong or not always holding the opinions I have today. So I worry about writing books rather than zines. Have you felt able to grow or change or learn even on the hot topics you cover?
Mm. Yeah, it is such a kind of it's a risk in lots of senses, right? There's a risk of committing yourself on the page to something that you might discover later is nonsense or has harmed someone, and you don't want that. But I think that that fear can also act as a prohibition in your writing, a psychic prohibition. So before you even start writing, there's a voice saying you're going to fuck it up and you're going to make a fool of yourself and you're going to hurt someone by writing this. And it makes you not write. Although it sounds like you're writing zines, which is really cool. So like, yes, there are, even between the years of like me writing this and me now, I don't agree with certain things that I argued in this book. And I'm quite comfortable with that. I think it can be scary, especially when you're younger. Like I started publishing on the internet. Like I didn't have that grace period that people in the previous generation had, where they like got to be bad young writers in the first part of their 20s or 30s, and all the magazines just are just mulch now, and mine like links that won't die. And it's not like I held radically different political perspectives. I just found some of my arguments were sloppy. Sometimes I was thoughtless. Sometimes, I just wrote things for money because I needed I needed $120, and there was someone wanted me to do a column, and now it's still like the most hits of anything that I've ever written is still this stupid Guardian column from 15 years ago or something. So, yes, I feel like I have been able to grow and change and learn, even though there's evidence of me thinking differently. And I think that, like, with the traces of social media that all of us have, even just the bad haircuts and the weird outfits, I think we're going to have to force ourselves to be more tolerant of our younger selves and to kind of, feel more compassionate towards them and not too critical.
Yeah.
But I would say just jump in and write in an emotional state and edit when you're feeling cool and calm. And just try, and you will edit out you'll know what is like not right. But yeah, you should just do it in an emotional state. It's fun.
Great. Thank you. That's great advice. Well, there's another question from Charlie. Please come to the UK, maybe for the next book. What's
Please.
Next book? Question mark.
Yes, I'm working on a novel right now. It's I find it really fun. It's political. I haven't finished it yet, so I don't really want to talk about it that much, but it's set on a Greek island. It's a novel. It's got a dyed-in-the-wool socialist character who's very funny. But yes, I would love to come to the UK. Thank you, Charlie, for inviting me. Oh.
Moiri says, can't wait. Just in case there's any more questions, we've got 5 more minutes. I will ask you, just because I am nosy, what are you reading right now, and like which writers do you find yourself in conversation with in your work or in your mind?
I'm such an eclectic reader. I'm never, oh my God. So at the moment I'm reading, these are probably all out of print, so you probably don't have them in your bookshop. maybe this one, Brother of the More Famous Jack. Have you heard of that?
I have heard the title, but I don't know if we have it in.
From a friend. It's so funny. It's a like Bildungsroman, first person from a very sassy young like studio intellectual. I'm reading a lot of first person kind of sassy, funny novels at the moment because mine is first person. I'm just kind of studying it to see how it's done. I'm reading Hegemony and Socialist Strategy to help research my socialist character's position. And I found this book in an op shop. It's probably out of print. It's a verso book called Dearest Pet on bestiality. It's a kind of a study of bestiality in kind of art and literature. And it's not the most riveting prose writing, but it's so fascinating. It's kind of about the intimate relationship between humans and non-humans. And the reason I'm reading that is because I always forget to put animals in my work, even though they obviously populate the world that we populate. We are animals, of course. And so I just wanted to have some knowledge so I can include some more animals in my novel.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. It's just always good to know what people are reading. And yeah. So what am I reading? I'm reading You People by Nikita Lalwani, which came out in 2020. And it's like a dual voice novel about it's kind of about migration. It follows the story of some Sri Lankans who are illegal in London and kind of who are working at this same pizzeria, and it's a little bit about helping each other and whether someone has an ulterior motive, but it has these like two kind of really distinct voices. And I'm really enjoying it.
Look it up.
I think that might be the end of the audience questions. We do have a couple more minutes left. I don't know, I could just listen to you talk about Blueberries forever. I found it so excellent, and I folded like every page down. Brother of the More Famous Jack is coming back in March.
That's so cool. Yeah, I didn't even know about it. Friend, it's her favorite book, and now I'm reading it. It's so funny. It's hilarious.
That's just a funny book is good. I feel like I just need like a funny to take the edge off sometimes. It's good to read upsetting things, but it's also good to read funny things.
Totally. Actually, other first person like sassy lady books that I've been reading lately, if you want some more funny books.
Yes, please.
Cassandra at the Wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the author of that? I won't check. I'll let anyone look that up. The Millstone by Margaret Drabble. It is amazing. It's hilarious, and it's about a pregnancy. Dorothy Baker, yes, wrote Cassandra at the Wedding. And also Mating by Norman Rush, not written by a woman, but a very compelling, hilarious first-person account of an American anthropologist working in Southern Africa in the 80s, doing kind of studying the men that she's hooking up with, and it's about feminist communes and politics, and it's very funny.
Oh wow, these are great recommendations. I feel like I also have a children's almanac that I'm reading very slowly because it's all about like here's what happens in nature in February, just to it's just sometimes nice to be like, here's what's coming up. There's a full moon coming. I mean, not anymore. It's happened, but it's nice. And then it has crafts.
Oh, wow. That's so soothing.
And it has like recipes, and it tells you like what animal traces you can find outside.
Who publishes such things?
So this one is from the National Trust. I think it's Nosy Crow. And it's called the Children's Nature Almanac for 2022.
Oh.
And I bought it in November it came into the shop, and instead of putting it on the shelf, I bought it.
Yeah, that's the terror of working in a bookshop.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I will remind everyone that this beautiful book is for sale and you can buy it. There's a button below. And it was just such a pleasure to get to talk to you about it, Ellena. Thank you so much for being here.
She was such a great host, and I loved chatting with you. And I hope I'll see you one day in